Good morning. Welcome to this KTVU special Voices for Change. I'm Greg Lee. We're with you this morning to dig deeper into the urgent and critical issues facing our community. We'll continue over the course of the upcoming weeks to engage in this conversation. This week, we're focusing on the landscape of sports. The killing of George Floyd set off protests around the world, including some of the biggest names in professional athletics.
If I was George Floyd,
If I was George Floyd,
we will not be silenced.
We assert our right to peacefully protest.
Countless others in the black community are heartbreaking.
we just can't stay silent.
The process begins with us listening
and learning, because understanding the problem
is the first step in fixing it.
It means a lot to not only us, but the community of Oakland and beyond that. So it's just a step in the right direction. We don't have 1 million people here, but we got enough. We got a crowd, and that's all you need.
Professional athletes across the spectrum have voiced their support for the fight for social justice, racial equality, and reform. We've already seen some incremental change and an elevated level of consciousness in some of the sports we love. As fans wait for their favorite teams to start play again, many are finding renewed reasons to cheer on their sports idols, men and women who refuse to stand on the sidelines as the nation reaches a turning point. One local coach broke barriers the moment she was hired. Sharman Smith is the first black coach of the UC Berkeley women's basketball team. During this time of unrest, she's been protesting alongside thousands of others, using her platform to push for change. I spoke to her earlier this week.
Coach, thanks for joining us. We have been seeing a lot of athletes and coaches stepping up, and we know that you've been active in these protests calling for real change. And we also know that it runs in your family. Your grandfather, part of the civil rights movement, a freedom rider. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience at these protests so far?
It's been something that is really important for me to participate in. I was participating in protests at Berkeley when Michael Brown was killed. And so unfortunately, we're still doing the same thing for the same reasons. But when you do get out there and you see the number of people who are in it with you and care enough to be in the streets and, just having people chant all together things like no justice, no peace, it really is something that is comforting to me. And it's really important. And I think these protests are impacting things and causing some change in different areas. And I think it definitely needs to continue as one part of the movement.
Coach, as you know, we revere our athletes and coaches and in some cases idolize them. What does it mean to be able to use your platform, in addition to the fact that you are the first black coach with the Berkeley women's team? I mean, how important is that role to you?
Yeah, I take it very seriously, right? Being the first black coach at Cal in women's basketball. Honestly, it's an obligation that you carry as a black American in everything that you do, right? Because oftentimes you're the first and you're always looked at to perform exceptionally. That's another issue within our society. And I embrace the pressure. I know that I'm extremely fortunate to have the job that I have. And it's not just about basketball. I do know that our team will continue to improve and we will win games. And I will also always use my platform to try and help, make things better for my student athletes and the society as a whole. I don't subscribe to the, shut up and dribble type mentality. I think that's horrible. I think we're human beings. I think if anyone else has a privilege in which they're given a platform, it's okay for them to speak up. So why not athletes, right? And why not coaches? And I take it as an obligation, and I don't think there's any other way to operate.
Coach, you talk about this being more than basketball, and it certainly is, as we see the NBA start to look at plans to restart, because again, we're in the shadow of this pandemic. There are talks with some of the NBA players who say, we don't want to play because we don't want to take attention away from this movement. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can't speak to what's right for NBA players. I'm not in their situation. I do know that I've heard, on the other side of that, let's play and let's put the money back into the communities that need it, So I think there are arguments on each side. So I'm kind of staying in my lane when it comes to, what's good for college athletics. There are some things that are out there professionally that I think explain the issues of systemic racism and what's going on in this country. When you look at hiring practices, particularly in the NFL, when you look at the lack of diversity in senior leadership positions in athletic administration, like those are the things that I want people to be focused on right now in order to change the system. That's what has to be done, because this isn't about changing one person's ideology or the way a group of people behave. This is about dismantling a structure that has been embedded for years and years, hundreds and hundreds of years. And that takes a lot of work to get to the root of that.
You're obviously a role model for the young women that you coach and that see you at these protests. We have seen lots of young people engaged in these protests and people of all races, all genders. What is it, the message that you're sending to your players as you are leading by example, but also in the discussions that you're having?
Yeah, I think it's what you mentioned before. I've been out several times. The Hollywood protest in Southern California was massive. You mentioned Oakland Tech. I encourage my student athletes to use their platforms for positive change in their communities and in this country. And I think that right now, this is a movement. It feels different than any other time because you talk about the diversity and the numbers. And I think we have a special time to really enact change and be about something that's extremely meaningful in our history. And whether it be this issue or something else that's going to come up along the road, as I mentioned, it's a privilege to be a student athlete or a coach at the #1 public institution, and we'll take full advantage of that privilege. And part of that is having a platform. And I think a great way to use your platform is fighting to make things better around you. And I know that we have a really talented and bright group of student athletes that are all about that. And I have their back, and they know that, I'll fight for them in whatever ways I can. And I know that they have my back as well.
Our thanks to Coach Smith. We're also seeing athletes speak up in predominantly and historically white sports. NASCAR's Bubba Wallace broke barriers, becoming the first driver to ride in a Black Lives Matter car. He's just one figure pushing for diversity and change. As professional athletes stand up against racism and show support for the Black Lives Matter movement, NASCAR announced a major change. The Confederate flag is now banned at all events and tracks.
Sorry. Bravo. Props to NASCAR and everybody involved. This has been a stressful couple weeks. That was a huge pivotal moment for the sport. A lot of backlash, but it creates doors and allows the community to come together as one. And that's what the real mission is here. So I'm excited about that.
26-year-old driver Bubba Wallace led the call for the ban. He's the only black driver currently in the Cup Series. This week he raced in this car, painted with Black Lives Matter, and wore a shirt that said, "I can't breathe," in honor of George Floyd.
We were trying to say that Black Lives Matter too. If we put TOO on the end, I think a lot more people would understand it. We want to be treated equally and not judged off our skin color. That's what we're trying to get across. We want to be a part of this nation as one and come together as one. I think by running this branding on our car, putting the hashtag out there, bringing more awareness to it, it lines up with the videos that we had put out as NASCAR listening and learning.
There's been some backlash to the flag ban from at least one other driver and on social media from fans who say it represents Southern pride and heritage, not slavery and oppression.
To you, it may seem like it's heritage, but others see hate. And I don't understand why it's so hard for us. We're selfish. We're a selfish nation, but we need to come together and meet in the middle and be like, you know what? If this bothers you, I don't mind taking it down.
In another predominantly white sport, San Jose Sharks' Evander Kane has co-founded an organization called the Hockey Diversity Alliance, designed to force positive change within the game and within society.
We've been outraged for hundreds of years, and nothing's changed. It's time for guys like, Tom Brady and Sidney Crosby and those type of figures to speak up about what is right and clearly in this case what is unbelievably wrong, because that's the only way we're going to actually create that unified anger to create that necessary change, especially when you talk about systematic racism.
Wallace said this isn't about keeping people out. This is about bringing people in. Coming up after the break, Muhammad Ali's family talks about his legacy of activism, their thoughts and the protests, about the protests and about Colin Kaepernick and why they believe they're still fighting his fight.
You my opposer when I want freedom. You my opposer when I want justice. You my opposer when I want equality.
You cannot talk about athletes and activism without mentioning Muhammad Ali. The greatest fought his heart outside of the ring as he did inside of it. Earlier this week, I spoke with his daughter, Kalia Ali, and his grandson, Jacob Ali Wertheimer. We discussed the protests, what is next, and why they believe Colin Kaepernick is the Muhammad Ali of our time.
Jacob, Kalia, can't thank you enough for joining us. Kalia, I want to start with you. Obviously, you both have remarkable list of achievements on your own, but certainly carrying on the legacy of your father. When you look at the protests and the calls for change right now, what are your thoughts that they're fighting the same fight that your dad did?
Yes, and since we're reflecting, as I sit here next to my son, I realize this is the same way my grandmother sat next to my father and so on, that the ugly hand of racism is systemic. And it's been long, and I just hope and pray someday that my son isn't sitting next to his child having the same conversation.
So many young people have been praised for the protests that they're organizing and the way that they're making their voices heard. Obviously, you are one of them. What does it mean to see the way that your generation is really stepping up in this moment?
It's really wonderful to see the actions of my generation, to see the leadership shown by my generation. I think something that we see very often is that younger generations often are the ones to take lead in things like protesting. And as we grow older and we become the adults and we feel that this world becomes our world to live in, we want to make sure that it aligns with our values. I think my generation has always been one that's been a bit more keyed in on issues of racial injustice, social injustice in general. And I really want to applaud everyone who's been using their voice and out protesting and demanding the change that needs to happen in this country.
Kalia, in this moment, there's a story that many may not know about the greatest, about Muhammad Ali, that he was introduced to boxing by a police officer. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
As a young boy, he had a beloved red bike. At the Ali Center, we call it the red bike moment. The bike was stolen from him. He, not too shortly after, ran into a white police officer who said to him, "You have to fight for what you want. You can't sit there and cry." So long story short, my father goes to PAL Police Athletic League and takes boxing lessons there. He also so happened to be a boxing trainer. And from that point forward, the rest is history. So the takeaway from that story is it was a white police officer that changed the trajectory of my father's life. This is something we have to aspire to as a nation. This is what's possible when we're at our best.
I believe that story really is a statement of what this nation must become, and anything less is unacceptable.
Kalia, when you look back on your father's life and all that he accomplished and that he was the greatest boxer in the world, but then he would go home and still face systemic racism, how important is understanding that message about where this fight is really rooted?
I think it's rooted in our hearts. And that's the one thing we really have to look into and change. I think important work has been done recently. A shift in the dialogue of our nation and the world has occurred. And I do have more hope than I did yesterday for the future. But I think it starts with love and self-love. And for Black Americans, to be robbed of that privilege, to be presumed guilty or wrong or suspicious just by the color of your skin, would make self-love very difficult. And it's one reason why my father's voice was so incredibly important during the civil rights movements. He was a Black man who stood up and said, "I am beautiful, I am great," despite. And that's something that we as individuals have to do. But the collective sound of society, I do hope we're beginning to make that change.
The topic of the show this week is about sports figures and the intersection of sports and race. And obviously, Muhammad Ali was at the forefront of that when it was unpopular. When you look at what was said by Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, apologizing, I know you're very close with Colin Kaepernick. Can you explain to me what that means for Colin having fought this fight again when it was unpopular, much like your father did, Kalia?
I feel that Roger Goodell, plain and simple, owes Colin Kaepernick an apology. It's just half-hearted. it's obviously, look, a step forward, right? But without a direct apology, it doesn't mean much to me. I mean, there's 70% of the players for the NFL are African American, and only 3 of them are coaches. Broad, sweeping quality and policy changes still need to take place. There's a lot of work to do, but you know what that first step is for me? A direct apology. I can't speak for Colin Kaepernick. I don't even know if they want it, but that's my feeling.
And something that I feel that really needs to be understood is that, a lot of people like to praise my grandfather and the stance he took now, but he was very much vilified at the time. I think it's important that we remember that, because the same thing happened to Colin. And you can't be a fan of my grandfather and not support the stance Colin took. Colin took a knee to police brutality. My grandfather stood against racial injustice. The stances were physically different, but politically, ideologically, socially, they were completely the same. And I think it's really unfair. I think it's very hypocritical for someone to praise the work my grandfather did and then try and dismiss everything Kaepernick stood for, everything he was willing to risk, just like my grandfather did.
Still continues to stand for it to this day.
Yeah. Jacob, we're starting to see changes and players across all leagues and professional sports standing up. Just recently, and remarkably, it took till 2020, but we saw the Confederate flag banned at NASCAR races. Does this show that people are coming to a higher sense of understanding or that a higher sense of justice at this point?
I believe I would need to see more continued action. I appreciate the sentiment. I appreciate the action, but it's a beginning. It's a first step, and we need to see more steps before we can make inclusive change about the people of this nation. But I do applaud the fact that it seems that more and more of white America in particular is coming along to change, or feeling that they can no longer be a bystander. That they can no longer just say, I'm not racist, and continue living their life, that they understand that they need to use their voice. And I'm very hopeful that at least some of the population is coming around to that fact.
I heard a quote, and it was, I understand that I may not ever understand, but I stand with you. And I think that sums it up very well. So I think that's a very heartfelt sentiment and an act of surrender. It's the first step toward educating all of ourselves and coming closer together.
When you look back at Muhammad Ali's life and what he fought for, and clearly having been there and seen him do what he did and standing up for justice and rights for everyone, what would he be thinking of this moment, and how critical is it that the country seizes onto it and makes it a real turning point for our country?
I think that he would be prayerful. My father was a man of God, and his beliefs as a Muslim first and foremost. I think that he would want to join the protesters and applaud them for all that they're doing for us. And I think that he'd be a part of the continued fight.
When I think about my grandfather, something that I really appreciate and he really made sure to ingrain in me was just the love of all people. And when I say that, I mean that because my grandfather's legacy is one that I have a privilege to carry on. But I think his legacy is one that he would have wanted us all to carry. I think he would have wanted us all to carry on his fighting spirit, his demand for justice, his demand for the rightful treatment of African Americans in this country. It's a pleasure for me to be able to represent my grandfather and carry on his legacy and everything he stood for. But I want to make sure that, it's something that we can all take in our lives, because that's what he really would have wanted.
Jacob Khalil, can't thank you enough for your time and your continued efforts in this fight, and really appreciate you speaking with us this morning.
Thank you very much.
We need to take a break, but coming up, he played in the NFL. Now he puts on a different uniform. We'll speak to a former athlete turned San Jose police officer. San Jose police officer Terence Campbell never thought he'd be in law enforcement. He played in the NFL and the Canadian Football League, but now he's using his new position as a chance to bring change. Officer Campbell joins us now. Sir, thanks for being here and thanks for your service. I want to start with the news that the police unions from LA, San Francisco, and San Jose have unveiled a reform agenda to, quote, root out racist officers. Is this the right step in your mind?
I think this is an excellent step. I think this is a very, very good step in the right direction, and what we're seeking to accomplish. We're seeking to bring more people in that have good character. No matter what your skin color is, it's all about the content of your character.
Officer, no doubt that you have a very dangerous job. Look no further than the Santa Cruz County deputy who died in the line of duty last week. What do you want the community to understand about officers like you that are on the front line?
I just want them to understand that we are here for the community. I can't speak around the whole entire world, but I know that here in San Jose that, our chief of police, he really preaches and really, advocates us being fair. It's so many things that we do where that if I wouldn't have got involved with this if I thought it was, was against people. You know what I mean? There's so many things here that we do at San Jose where that shows that, that we're doing it by the right way. We do those trainings in an academy. They talked about equality. They talked about, racial bias. They spoke on those subjects, and brought them up. So, that's why I want people to know that a lot of officers are good officers. They, especially ones that you see out in the community trying to, give back on the front line and stuff like that.
Sir, we just looked at some video of you talking to protesters on the front line. I know you've defended the actions of your department during those protests. What is your message to those protesters as they call for change?
To get out and vote, get out there and learn what's going on in your city. It's awesome that you're out there protesting. Thank you. You know what I'm saying? As an African-American man, I greatly appreciate it. And as a police officer, I greatly appreciate it because the people are essentially what empowers us. It's the same thing in sports. In sports, the fans is what gives the players the power, the fame. So the same thing with as officers, the citizens, the community, they give us the power. They give us the make our job a lot easier when they're happy. So I love what they're doing. I hope they can. I love that they did it. I just hope that they use that and now go out and vote. Go out and, become police officers, become judges, become doctors, lawyers. Get involved with the change. That's what we really need. So that's what I hope that the protesters do.
Officer Campbell, we got a couple minutes left, but I want to ask you, your message has been one of unity. How can police do a better job working with communities of color, and how can the community help you?
Transparency. We need to be transparent. As officers, I like to be transparent. I like to tell you everything. I want you to see that I'm normal, that I'm a regular guy like you. I'm a regular girl like you. I come from that neighborhood, so that's what I want. That's what I would like, and just, you have to follow directions. Officers ask you to do something, just be respectful and do it. And that would make everybody's job a lot easier. It would really help us out universal.
Officer Campbell, what do you make of all the athletes that are stepping up now? You were in the NFL playing alongside a lot of these guys. What does it mean to see them doing what they're doing?
Man, I love it, but guys always been like this, but now they're just speaking out more. But the locker room, guys have always felt this way and always stood up, and we always have these discussions in the locker room, and it would be no issue. We'll talk about it amongst each other, amongst teammates, and it'd be no issue. A lot of the times, it wouldn't be a problem. So now that they're just being more outspoken about it is excellent, because a lot of people look up to them. A lot of people look up to officers. A lot of people look up that our kids are following the lead, especially with social media. So that's is really an awesome thing, and I think it's good for everybody.
Officer Terence Campbell, San Jose Police, thank you again for your time, and thank you again for what you do in keeping us safe.
Man, thank you for having me on here, and thank y'all so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too. To rewatch any of the interviews you saw today, or for more on the movement taking place across the country, just download the all-new KTVU mobile app. You can find it in the App Store. I want to thank all of our guests for coming on today and engaging in some very important conversations. We will continue to do this for the next several weeks, talking about issues of social justice, racial inequality, and the fight that continues throughout the country and the rest of the world. Officer Terence Campbell, you heard his message of unity, and I hope that is one that we continue to spread in our community as well. We will see you next week. We are wishing you all a great and healthy Sunday. Have a great one.